Grace and peace be unto you, and peace from God, our holy parent. This is the day that the Lord has made, and we are rejoicing and glad to be in it. I'm Pastor Lamont Anthony Wells, and I am the national president of the African Descent Lutheran Association of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And I'm hippopotamus happy and peacock proud to have with me this day Dr. Malcolm Byrd, a reverend, a leader, a master pulpiteer, often known as the picketing preacher, a community leader, and currently serving as the senior minister at Mother A.M.E. Zion Church in Harlem. Welcome, my brother.
I am thrilled to be here with you, Pastor Wells, my dear friend and brother from over the years. Glad to be here.
Yes, and of course, everybody needs to know that he's an alpha man. We're both alphas, and I just got to say that. Oh, 06.
Oh, it might be May, but it's always cold when there's an alpha.
It's always cold, ice cold. So, Doc, my brother, as our ecumenical partner, the A.M.E. Zion Church, and we've been ecumenical partners for many years, right? And we've been engaging in conversations about being full communion partners, which means that we can share resources, we can share congregational pulpits without any kind of red tape or issues. And it allows us to be a bit more unified. That's kind of an agreement that churches do to work together, for those who don't know. What ways do you see that the ELCA and the A.M.E. Zion traditions can build a legacy together?
Well, beyond being Christian communions who believe in that route that leads towards Golgotha, there are so many things that we share together insofar as worship is concerned. But one area in which we most certainly can join forces, and I think this should really be the start of us developing full communion together, is centered around justice work, the fight for human liberation and dignity. That is pavement level ministry that both communions endorse as real Christian ministry at work and in action. Once we leave the pipe organs and the stained glass, the padded pews, which can be found in both denominations, the essential core ethic of Christianity is advocacy for those who have been marginalized and disinherited. And I believe that is an essential core piece of the gospel. And I think both our ELCA brothers and sisters and our A.M.E. Zion brothers and sisters most certainly agree upon. That is where we really should begin our ecumenical and full communion work, working together at pavement level for the cause of the marginalized.
Wow, that's very important. And for me, and I want to make this happen, and I want you and I to be one of the catalysts in our church. And we've worked together. We've been talking about this for some years now. We've been meeting about this and breaking bread about this. And for me, this full communion partnership, I think, is signature and it's essential. It's not just something ideal. It's just not something that looks good for the world to say, oh, we're coming back together as one. This is something essential, especially in the times that we're living in. This COVID situation, this pandemic, and other kinds of things, and just the reality of the decline of the church. The church is not dead, but the reality is that we have much work to do, and we can do it better together. You agree?
I fully agree, and I can assure you that there are many of us in the A.M.E. Zion Church who would love to see us move towards full communion. And I believe it's most certainly going to happen in our lifetime. And I don't think it will happen in our senior lifetime either. I think that day is coming sooner than later, but it's going to happen if we can get together first on issues of justice. That is where it really starts. Because if it's not on issues of justice, it literally will just be for the sake of doing it. And that's really what we don't need right now. We need to get together because we have a reason to get together. And the fastest way to do that is to join forces and to fight the evil of our day, which undoubtedly is racism and oppression of every kind.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm so glad now you've pastored many churches on the West Coast and in Brooklyn, and many of them have been significant, signifying, signature, premier, historic churches. But right
Yes.
now, you are pastoring the Mother African Methodist Episcopal Church, which is now located at 140 through 148 West 137th Street, which is the sixth home of this great church, but it is New York State's first Black church. So since the founding of the A.M.E. Zion Conference of Churches, you are now in Harlem,
Yeah.
and originally you were in various other places. Take us back to the late 18th century, where Blacks were worshiping at John Street Methodist Church. They were told and pushed to the back. They began having their own services around 1780. But in 1796, the Black members said, "We're out." And they rented a house on Cross Street. And one of
That's
those people was James Varick. Tell us about this man and the people who gathered there. What did they do? What was the climate like?
well. Several things occurred. If you look at when our church acknowledges that we were actually organized as a separate church, but still associated with John Street, is 1796. But Albert Raboteau spoke to, in that book from the late 70s, titled, and he actually taught me, titled Slave Religion, the mere fact that the Black parishioners of John Street Church were doing their own thing for some 20 years before we separated and organized as our freestanding congregation that now exists today. The Black members of John Street Church were organized in a class. Methodists believe in class systems. And so we were organized in a class of all Black members as early as 1774. And the class leader, which in the Methodist terms is sort of a sub-pastor, beginning in 1774 was a young 20-something-year-old fellow by the name of James Varick, who was the leader of Class 31, which was the all-Negro class in John Street Church. As you know, at the time, the rule was if more than 3 Black people were assembling without white supervision, measures would be taken against them. And we know the long of measures that would be taken. So every time the members of Class 31 would meet in the home of James Varick or at other places, they were breaking the law. They were defying the law in every sense of the word. And you are eminently correct. By 1780, they began to have their own worship services after James Varick was actually licensed to preach. He was licensed to preach, but he was not ordained. We have a two-system ordination process, deacon and elder. And it took James Varick 41 years to finally receive full ordination because of issues of racism. It took him 41 years to be ordained an elder. But what was going on in 1774 and in 1780 when we were having our separate meetings, we gave the white authorities the idea that we were just down there having religious services. But actually, under the shadow of religious services, we were actually teaching women and men how to read. Wow. We were actually formulating plans for an underground railroad before the well-known abolitionists even popularized it. We were finding routes, we were establishing safe houses for people who were escaping the dreadful stench of slavery in the South. We were also providing opportunities for individuals who were enslaved in New York City to find ways to go further northward to freedom. So it was a separate church service, but it was actually a justice institution. So when you talk about the A.M.E. Zion Church and the Freedom Church, we actually began as a movement before we were actually bona fide as a separate church.
Wow. So James Varick, this leader, he kind of initiated these things, and he gathered others around him like Abraham Thompson and other individuals to write the Book of Discipline and begin to organize this Christian faith. And it became this Freedom Church, as it's affectionately known. He ran schools, like you talked about, the education. He was the vice president of the African Bible Society. But one thing that I thought was very keen was that he established the first Black American newspaper called the Freedom's Journal. Does the Freedom's Journal still exist, and how is it engaged? Do y'all have copies of it somewhere?
No, there are copies that exist. I think the New York Public Library in their archives have a couple of copies. It was a very short-lived enterprise, in all honesty. It was actually run by John Russworm and Samuel Cornish, who were actually Presbyterians. But it was first printed and published in Mother A.M.E. Zion Church from about 1827 to about 1828. So it should be noted that Samuel Cornish really was the driving force behind it, but it was Varick and members of Mother A.M.E. Zion Church who essentially turned their church into community space to provide a way for this to actually be published. So yes, the first Black newspaper or first Black media outlet was literally produced in Mother Zion Church. That is correct.
Wow, this is a lot of history. You mentioned an important year, 1827. Around July 4th, 1827, New York State finally emancipated the wrongly enslaved Africans, and Mother A.M.E. Zion congregation, I hear, had a party. They had a big celebration that year, and at that time. But tragically for me, in hearing this, when I saw this, that just 2 weeks later, so a man who had been fighting for freedom, James Varick, died 2 weeks after that big emancipation celebration. As the pastor of that church during that time, I would have loved to see the church bulletin if I could, if there was one still around. What do you think he might have preached those days, those last couple of Sundays that he was around?
Well, there was, we do have accounts of some sermons that he delivered. Actually, the sermon that day was titled, I think, Sermon on the Occasion of the Abolition of Slavery. And he did something similar in 1807, commemorating the end of the transatlantic slave trade, at least the legal end of the transatlantic slave trade. We know it was still going on behind the scenes. But Varick, interestingly enough, was really never the official or appointed pastor of Mother Zion Church. That's a long story about that. He was, of course, a very effective leader, and in many respects, he was the preacher. But until about 1821, the Zion Chapel, the African Chapel, I know as Mother Zion Church, was still loosely connected to the John Street congregation. White pastor of John Street was technically the pastor, and the African Chapel was essentially just a chapel of John Street Church. But James Varick was still the resident preacher for the Black members in the African Chapel or in the Zion Chapel. And so he was, without question, the preacher and did all of the pastoral duties except administration of Holy Communion, because he did not have the ordination in order to do so. But he was the pastor, but technically he was never formally ever appointed by a bishop to be the pastor of a church. So Mother Zion didn't get its first Black pastor official pastor until 1821, and his name was Abraham Thompson.
Wow,
Mhm.
that's interesting. That's interesting. So he lived his life as a proclaimer and an abolitionist,
Yeah.
trying to engage the New York state government and really praying to God for the world to
Mhm.
be delivered from this demonic evil of racism and slavery.
Mhm.
So after July 4th, 1827, there was freedom, quote unquote, for blacks in the New York state, but slavery still existed in other areas of the country for many, many more years. And there's a day that's coming up that we celebrate every June. June 19th, in fact, called Juneteenth, also
Mhm.
known as Freedom Day or Jubilee Day or the Black 4th of July. And this day originally was June 19th, 1865, almost 2.5 years after January 1st, 1863, where the Emancipation Proclamation was given. The state of Texas, the most remote of the slave states, finally freed enslaved Americans of African descent in the Confederacy. And what bothered me about this is originally I was taught or had heard that I thought Juneteenth meant that they had just heard about it, that they didn't, that the Emancipation Proclamation existed and that the slaves in Texas or the enslaved in Texas didn't hear about it. But the
Mhm.
reality is the state sanctioned leaders at that time waited until the Civil War ended. So it wasn't that the people didn't know that the Emancipation Proclamation occurred. So that's
Mhm.
why you got to really go into history. It's very important to know the history. So Juneteenth, a time to remember our resiliency, because they held on for a long time before they could engage the freedom. How does the Freedom Church commemorate Juneteenth today?
Well, many of our congregations in their geographic locations, of course, sponsor community-wide Juneteenth celebrations. We did so in my previous congregation, and I was looking forward to doing something similar here this year. Um, but when you talk about Juneteenth in the context of a Freedom Church, we are always constantly engaged in liberation work. So we will always commemorate things as Juneteenth, but for us, addressing the needs of our people, first of all, by sharing the story of our sojourn since being here upon these shores, that is a 365-day emphasis of our denomination. We
Amen.
so we're never not addressing something associated, with our history. So in a typical A.M.E. Zion church, yes, you will hear some things during Black History Month, but you will hear things all throughout the year because our history and heritage is valuable all year, not just in one month. In the
Amen.
context of Zion, I ensure that in every worship service, we sing one of the songs of our people. We sing a Negro spiritual. I don't care what service it is. We
Amen.
sing one of the songs of our people because I want the next generation to understand our heritage as a people in the faith, in the types of songs that we sing. So what's most popular now may not be able to speak to the history of oppression that we have experienced here as the people. And what's popular now may not always point to the fact that our history doesn't start with slavery. You know,
Exactly.
thousands upon thousands of years of Black excellence that we have contributed to the world and to the globe. So our history doesn't start and change. So we have to tell the full story, the full story.
Whole story. And there are many people that have come through Mother AME Zion in particular, not just the whole denomination, because we would be here all day. But if we were to name just a few that have been members, active members of Mother AME Zion, we could talk about Harriet Tubman, right?
Yes,
We could
yes,
talk about Frederick Douglass. We could
yes.
talk about Isabella Baumfree. or
Yes.
as we know now, Sojourner Truth, who joined in 1829. And
That's
then
right.
now that you're in Harlem, the
Mm-hmm.
Harlem Renaissance members had Langston Hughes, W.E.B. Du Bois, Marian Anderson, Roland Hayes, Joe Lewis, and Paul Robeson, who was the brother of the then pastor, Dr. Benjamin C. Robeson at that time. So naming just all these people, like y'all have the heavyweights. Like when you talk about Black history, y'all have the heavyweights, right? Just imagine sitting in their midst.
Mm-hmm.
How does their public legacy shape the A.M.E. Zion Church? And I wonder, just curious, what kind of work did they do in the church in their time? Because these people are leaders in their own right, right? So
Of
how does
course.
a Paul Robeson sit there? What does a, because we live in a world where these choir members, if you're a good singer, you know, you don't sing, you get out the choir, you don't sing in the choir anymore, right? Because
Right.
you're a professional singer now. So how does Marian Anderson and Paul Robeson sit in the pews or sit in the choir stand? What was their participation like?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that persons like Joe Lewis and Langston Hughes, and even to some extent W.E.B. Du Bois, were never in any official capacity in the church. They weren't really official members. The church during the Harlem Renaissance had something called the J.C. Price Lyceum, where every Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock, a prominent lecturer or speaker of the day would come in to lecture and to speak to a packed house every Sunday, because the church has always acknowledged that our work as a Christian community isn't just to give people good doctrine and good Bible and good liturgy, but we recognize that we had to give people with all of the tools they needed to live day to day. Du Bois was always on the fence about organized religion, but from growing up in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, he associated with an A.M.E. Zion church there. When he was studying at Harvard, he attended the North Russell Street A.M.E. Zion Church in Boston, now known as Columbus Avenue A.M.E. Zion Church, not because he was seeking spiritual fervor, but he admired the pulpit brilliance of the well-educated and learned minister of the church at the time, Dr. Beeman, who was minister there. And he's talked a great deal about that. And so Du Bois in Harlem, living on Edgecombe Avenue, he was a regular fixture in Mother Zion Church, not seeking religion, but seeking brilliance, which he knew he could find in A.M.E. Zion churches on Sunday morning. In the case of Marian Anderson, in her early years here in New York, she sang as a soloist in the choir at Salem Methodist Church, and also in the choir of Mother A.M.E. Zion. Paul Robeson, probably in my belief, the world's quintessential Renaissance man. He did a little bit of everything: athletics, social justice work. He was actually an attorney by trade. You name it, he did it. A great man of Alpha Phi Alpha. But his father was formerly a Presbyterian minister who left the Presbyterian church because of their lukewarm approach to the sufferings of Black people. And he joined the A.M.E. Zion Church and became a pastor of several A.M.E. Zion churches in New Jersey. So Robeson was actually reared in parsonages and in rectories, as it were, of A.M.E. Zion congregations. And so it's not I don't find it odd that he would opt to continue his activism and his participation in A.M.E. Zion churches. But also his brother was pastor here for 29 years. His funeral was held at Mother Zion in 1976. In our museum, we have a lot of his personal things in the museum at the church. But also one very prominent member of the church who died at the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance was a woman by the name of Madam C.J. Walker, who was a member of Mother Zion Church from 1914 until her from 1915 until her passing in 1919. And if it wasn't for a small bequest that she made to the church in her death, we wouldn't be able to have built the current building that we have right now. She was a prominent very faithful and active member of Mother A.M.E. Zion Church, and she supported Livingstone College, our chief institution in North Carolina, with her own means. So you name it. There isn't a church in America, Black or white, that can boast of the litany of prominent, bona fide members that we have had at Mother Zion. No other church has this type of role of prominent members as we do. No other church in America.
I hear you.
Do your research. No one else has it.
Amen. So the church that in this current place is the sixth home.
Yes.
But one of the homes was in Greenwich Village. So around 1864, the church moved from where it was and relocated to 10th and Bleecker Street, right? Which is what we know now as Greenwich Village. And then it was called Little Africa in history. And from 1864 to 1904, the church was in that particular area. They called this the flourishing period, right? So the church is growing, wealth and expansion. The church is organizing and moving down to the south and other particular areas. But just prior to this particular period, as Mother A.M.E. Zion is growing, in 1853 in New York was growing as well and expanding, and most people lived in what we call as Lower Manhattan. And New York wanted to build a park, which we now know as Central Park. And it goes from 59th Street and to then 106th Street, but now 110th Street. And in 1857, New York State declared eminent domain over an area around 83rd Street to West 89th Street to build the park in its entirety. And I want you to know that this move displaced a thriving, predominantly African-American community called Seneca Village. Now, Seneca Village began in 1825, and it also, we have to admit, had some Irish immigrants and a few German descendants, but mainly it was first-time Black home owners. Amen. Not squatters, as the media at that time tried to say that they were. These were property owners. According to New York law, as a property owner, this also gave them the right to vote, or at least the men at that time, the right to vote. There were people like 25-year-old Andrew Williams, who was a shoe shiner, who bought the first 3 lots for $125, and Epiphany Davis, who was a store clerk, bought 12 lots for $578, and another A.M.E. Zion Church purchased 6 lots. So an A.M.E. Zion Church was there in Seneca Village. Tell us about that church and the effects of the displacement.
Well, a number of things. I also want to say that Seneca Village at this time, even in the 1850s, was literally considered the suburbs. It was literally actually considered more rural territory than anything. People were seeking to get out of the uncomfortability that could be found in 19th century close quarters. The city stunk, to be very honest with you. Disease was ravaging the streets, and people were really uncomfortable with being in those places. And so there were some prospectors who opted to begin to move out to have a peaceful existence. As has been the case in the history of the A.M.E. Zion Church through the years, we typically move to a space when we know that Black people may be heading there. And so when we moved to Greenwich Village in 1864, it wasn't really fully Little Africa then. For the most part, the Black community historically was concentrated in that area in and around Church and Leonard Streets in present-day Tribeca. But we were beginning to be pushed out of that area, and we were beginning to move towards that area known as present-day Greenwich Village. Excuse me, that area known as Greenwich Village. But we got there essentially before the bulk of the people would later arrive. That is also the case with Seneca Village. We knew that that was probably the next stop for a burgeoning Black community to emerge, and it had already happened. So what do? We planted a church there, and it was named literally First A.M.E. Zion Church. That was the name of it. That was the dedicated name of that church. I think that church was dedicated, I think, about 1853 or something to that effect. That building.
Yes.
And it would be razed to the ground a couple of years later. And what happened to our people in Seneca Village, and there is a sign in that section of the park that talks about the A.M.E. Zion Church and that community around it in the park now. But what essentially happened with the people of Seneca Village, it was the first time that eminent domain was put into effect in the U.S.
Wow.
It was the first time that city officials pretty much went in and just decimated an entire community. The community resisted in the sense that they were offered money for their property.
Yes.
What offered was far below, almost
value,
angrily below what they had paid for it and what the property was actually valued. So they said no. They said no. We are not going to sell our property for anywhere near what you're offering. So the city said, fine, so we'll take it. And that's precisely what they did. And the members of that congregation were essentially merged back into, they went two places. We had an A.M.E. Zion Church already in present-day Harlem that was founded in 1824. And so many of them migrated up to Harlem, which was still, for the most part, a Dutch village in many respects. And some of them migrated back down to Greenwich Village and joined Mother Zion Church. And, some we just can't account for.
Wow.
But
just imagine.
But that congregation was a congregation of about 200 members.
Wow. That's what I mean. Like, just imagine the continuity of a thriving Black community in the middle of Manhattan. It could have made for a different New York, maybe even a different United States of America. I mean, the opportunity was there, and it was snatched away from them to build Central Park,
Yes.
a place that's about 3 or 4 blocks down from where I live and a few more blocks from where you are, a place that I often go about. But I'm really concerned right now. This park for years was a dream come true for Blacks, but now it's very haunting, even from this particular history that we're sharing about today. I'm reminded that Marvin Gaye sang for us a song like, "What's Going On, Brother, Brother," That song is really a part of my own consciousness and my social activism, my playlist, my mantra. What's your freedom music, or what's your freedom mantra? I know you like music, so
yeah,
what?
I'm always thinking in terms of the Negro spirituals speak deeply with me. The late Wyatt T. Walker shared that view, and I was honored to talk to him about it many years ago. He did a big piece on the Negro spirituals and what they have meant to us as a people. But I would say one of the greatest singers who always finds a way to address what I'm feeling is Nina Simone.
I knew you were going to say that.
So it is not just the Mississippi Goddams, and she has a lot of other ones. But you took my teeth, or one such as Sunday in Savannah, which speaks so deeply to me in many respects. So Nina Simone is my favorite, and then the day goes by that I don't play at least one of her tracks as I'm going about the day.
And knowing you probably play her on vinyl, right?
Yeah, I do. I have a record player right here.
I know.
Yes. Right here. Yes, you're precisely right. Yes.
So there's a part of me, I love music, right? So there's a part of me, I'm not a real, hip hop is in me, right? I'm not a big rap person. I love the hip hop culture. But I'm reminded of Public Enemy's song in 1989, led by Public Enemy with Chuck D and Flavor Flav, and it was "Fight the Power." Right, and that particular song was written for the movie "Do the Right Thing," And it was written the summer of 1989. Fight the Power, we were saying. And I'm a little older than you, but I remember that particular song during that period of time. That was the summer of 1989. But just a few months before that song came out, in April of 1989, we really needed to be fighting the power with 5 Black boys who were arrested and indicted and wrongly accused there because of Central Park. We're still at Central Park, right? We haven't left Central Park yet. And it was an awful thing. The young lady that was raped and abused and beaten badly. But these young men, as the cops were just trying to find somebody to make sense of this tragedy and what happened, and they just start pulling people here, there, and everywhere. And Trisha Maylee was brutally raped, tragic and awful. But just as tragic, several young men were wrongly accused of a crime. Many people were arrested, but various incidents in that particular park at that time and that day, they charged over 10 people, but these 5 teenagers were indicted for rape. No DNA, no other tangible evidence found except a coerced testimony. And after the confession of Matthias Reyes in 2001, who was already a convicted murderer in jail, a serial rapist, serving life in prison, who had DNA that matched, these were now exonerated. Yusef Salaam, Antron McCray, Kevin Richardson, Raymond Santana, Corey Wise. These are Harlem residents. What do we say to our people in Harlem and regarding this park? Like, how do we keep dealing with these same type of atrocities, Brother Pastor? What do we say to these people?
Well, a big part of my spiritual discipline is to get up in the morning and I go down to the park and I would jog or walk. Most mornings I'm walking. I'm not jogging. I think I'm jogging, but I'm walking. And I go into the park, turn around and come back up. But here lately, I just get to 110th Street and turn around.
Yeah.
I won't even go in now.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like an edge of 110th Street is kind of like the edge of this place where I'm entering into a space where now I don't feel safe. So, and what does that mean? That essentially means that historically, as we know, violence and danger in Black communities is typically rooted in white women feeling threatened. Look at the summer of 1919, all that racial violence all over the country. Look at the burning of the Greenwood district. It wasn't just for this being a prominent Black district, but a number of things. Anytime a white woman feels unsafe, then the violence happens. And so what happened in the park a few days ago, that brother legit could have lost his life in many respects. And here is the issue. That woman, A.M.E. Cooper, brands herself and is pretty much regarded as a liberal.
Yep.
So even our liberal brothers and sisters of all ethnicities, I think she fully knew what a call like that and how the stakes like that were high. She knew precisely what she was doing. And so when it comes to what do you say to people here in Harlem, here's the thing. Nobody really needs to say anything to us. We've always known this. We don't need to.
Nothing new.
Nothing new. Oppression is nothing new to us. So just like in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic, it's hard to convince Black men and Black women here in Harlem that COVID-19 is going to be the one thing that kills them. They know their friends and family members are dying, but they also lost tremendous amount of friends and family in the midst of the crack epidemic. When HIV and AIDS was ravaging our community, without the necessary support and services, when we were treated as if we were nobodies and pretty much left to die. When we spend time upstate and come back as felons and can't get a job, no access to fair and equitable housing, and if you do get a job, you are most certainly underemployed. If anybody can write a book on marginalization, the Black people here in Harlem can certainly do that. So this is really, in all honesty, nothing new for us. The difference is, from our perspective, we know of stories and cases like the Central Park Five that have not made it to the media, that in some cases still occur here in this neighborhood. So you know, we know things that haven't yet made it to social media.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
And the reality is, right, so like these things are being videoed now, right, in a lot of areas. So you know, thank God that Christian Cooper had enough mindfulness to record that key moment that helped us to see A.M.E. Cooper faking it. Like, I don't care what her apology is right now. Like, literally, she didn't even apologize for faking it. She apologized for what she considers maybe a mishap or a misunderstanding about how she felt threatened. Again, making it about herself, but not apologizing for her literally lying and going into a fit that you could clearly see in that particular video. But go ahead.
Real quick, she did not lose her job or whatever because of how she treated or talked to that man.
Right.
She really lost her job because how she treated that dog. So that's what most liberal white Americans are upset about. Isn't how she treated that. It's how she treated that dog. And we've always known that animals in America have better protection than Black people.
Wow.
There's an endangered species list that protects wild animals, but nothing protects us.
Wow. And we get accused of these things. I remember even before Twitter, the then just mogul Donald Trump, who's now the president of these yet to be United States of America, he put a whole full page ad vilifying those 5 young men. And he still, to this day, even after them being exonerated, won't apologize. And he's called recently so many people so many things. He's called Kaepernick a son of a bitch. He's called African and Caribbean countries shithole countries. He's done all of this stuff with his Twitter handle. Just the other week, Twitter finally start flagging and checking his misleading information, and I think he's right now trying to even get an executive order to stop that. He's like a bully.
Well, white supremacy is always unrepentant.
Wow.
White supremacy is unrepentant.
Then it will never get delivered.
No. As long as there is an ideal of supremacy, one culture over another for whatever reason, be it for commerce, you name it, there will not be a repentance. There might be an apology for the sake of continuing to ensure that you are able to secure the collection. It will always be without full repentance. Look at the United States of America. We were freed from slavery. No one has yet to really say we freed them, but we really haven't freed them. Let's do something about it. And so when you look at the history of slavery in America, and there are scholars who are really doing work on this insofar as DNA. You and I have things in our DNA now that can literally be traced back to the sufferings that our ancestors experienced during slavery here in the U.S. So it's not just, excuse me. So it's not just a slave diet that might be killing us. It's oppression that's honestly killing us, to be very honest with you.
Right.
It's systematic oppression and bruising that's doing that to us right now.
So I want to thank you for having this conversation with me and in this particular time and at this particular time. So as a voice, as one of the voices, one of the key leading voices from the Freedom Church, how must we balance freedom of speech with moral responsibility? And how do we fight these powers that be? How do we balance our voice and, as a voice, and how do we keep, doing what's right and just advocating and not just talking about it? How do we also be about it? What do we need to be doing? How do we fight these powers that be? Because I want to run in Central Park again.
Yeah, I do. I'm getting there. I'm not quite there yet, but I would like to get there. The first thing is we must be willing to check our notions pertaining to respectability. There's a great deal of conversation right now. I won't go into all of it regarding who's right, those who are doing the looting or those who own the businesses who are being looted. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot rooted in some of the responses that
I'm talking right now about Minneapolis, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right, that I'm getting from people all over, pastors, clergy, from every possible denomination. Everyone is addressing how the looting is wrong, but no one is talking about the bondage that brought the looting on. The other piece to this is that for those who are saying that looting is wrong in this regard, have nothing to say about the fact that the vast majority of Black people in America have ancestors who were looted from West Africa. So we were literally stolen.
Literally
stolen, brought here to work for hundreds of years for free, without a wage or anything. So when we first, we have to remove the hypocrisy from the conversation. If we're going to say the country, looting is wrong, let's get back to addressing how that's all America has done. Commerce is America's religion.
Yep.
Commerce.
And that's really what they want to get back to. They're not trying to get back to church and to worship. They don't care about that. They really are trying to get back to the business at hand, Wall Street and every other and Main Street. Yeah.
Yep. And they've historically have known that if you want to promulgate evil, but to package it in a way that will be acceptable by the people, the first thing you do is you get to the prophets and get them to share the message, but to wrap it and to cloak it in the Christian flag.
Wow.
Let's talk about how a great number of those slave owners in the North and the South were prominent, upstanding Christians, because they're clergy people in those congregations. No, in that time, they're clergymen in those congregations maintain the status quo for the sake of going along to get along. And I see a lot of that occurring right now in 2020. And it was deadly to the church then, and it's even more deadly to the church now. At some point in time, we're going to have to, in the words of the late James Cone, the church has to be willing to lose its life for the sake of its life.
Wow. Yeah, we've got to do something, and we've got to keep. I like that. We've got to deal with the hypocrisy of what's going on and address those things, not just what it looks like now, but what has it been in history that's been a part of the structural engagement and the systemic things that make things the way that they are, and the response that comes from it. I believe in the law of physics. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So the reality is that We've got to do better. I'm hoping and praying in Jesus' name that our two traditions, our churches, you know, we've again been known as the whitest church in America, and we can be with the first Black deep traditional church of African descent, particularly here in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And in America, that leads in a lot of ways the Freedom Church. If our A.M.E. Zion churches and our ELCA churches can get together and as a denominational structure, I believe that the sky is the limit and heaven is our goal.
I
So
agree.
thank you. Thank you.
My prayer too. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Reverend Dr. Malcolm Byrd.